On the morning of February 19th, 1982, first responders arrived at a quiet home in Brighton, New York, a suburban community just outside Rochester. They were responding to a 911 call from a concerned neighbor who had reported there's been, I think, a murder across the street. It was a calm winter morning, but what police would find inside the home would be anything but ordinary. Officer Marcus Spaker, then serving with the Brighton Police Department, was one of the first to reach the scene. He approached the house without knowing exactly what awaited inside, responding to what had been logged as a situation of unknown cause. Upon entering the home, he made his way upstairs and encountered a sight that would haunt him for the rest of his life. There, lying in her bed, was 29-year-old Kathy Krauseneck. To the untrained eye, she might have appeared to be peacefully asleep. But the grim reality was quickly evident. An axe was still buried in her head. It was a scene of horrifying violence, made even more shocking by the fact that the weapon remained lodged in place. Officer Spaker later described the moment simply, saying she looked like she was sleeping with an axe buried into her head. There were no immediate signs of forced entry. No signs of struggle were reported at that time. The home was quiet, still, and undisturbed, except for the brutal scene upstairs. For Officer Spaker and others who entered that house, the memory of that day would never fade. The image of Kathy Krauseneck's body and the sheer violence of the crime would become one of the most disturbing memories of their careers. Among the most deeply troubling elements of the Kathy Krauseneck case was the presence of her young daughter, Sarah, inside the home during or after the murder. Just 3 years old at the time, Sarah may have spent hours alone in the house with her mother's body before authorities arrived. The realization of this possibility would weigh heavily on investigators and remain a haunting aspect of the case. Investigator Richard Corrigan later stated that Kathy had likely been dead for more than 8 hours by the time first responders entered the home. This timeline raised the likelihood that Sarah had been left alone in the house for much of the day, unaware of the full extent of what had happened. The chilling detail turned a horrific homicide into a deeply personal and emotional tragedy. Officer Marcus Spaker, one of the first to arrive at the scene, openly reflected on the emotional toll the discovery took on him. While the violent nature of the crime was unforgettable, it was the thought of the small child left in such a traumatic environment that would disturb him for years to come. He admitted to having nightmares about Sarah being alone in the house, underscoring how profoundly the incident affected those involved. In the early stages of the investigation, pressing questions emerged. What had Sarah seen? What might she have understood or remembered? These were concerns that arose immediately, though investigators had no clear answers at the time. Her presence added a heartbreaking layer to an already horrific case, turning a brutal crime scene into a scene of unimaginable isolation and sorrow. The initial police response to the murder of Kathy Krauseneck was swift, but the emotional and psychological impact would be long-lasting. Officer Marcus Spaker, one of the first on the scene, vividly recalled what he saw upon entering the bedroom. She looked like she was sleeping with an axe buried into her head, he said. The disturbing image, frozen in his memory, was unlike anything he had encountered before in his career. The brutality of the crime, a young woman murdered in her own bed, the weapon still embedded in her skull, left investigators stunned. The home itself appeared undisturbed, with no immediate signs of forced entry. Yet upstairs lay a horrifying scene that would stay with the officers who witnessed it for decades. For Spaker, it was not only the violence of the act that haunted him, but also the overwhelming thought that Kathy's 3-year-old daughter may have been in the house with her mother's body for hours. Spaker later admitted to having nightmares about that day. The image of the child, alone and unaware, created a sense of helplessness that cut deeper than the crime scene itself. The case was more than just a murder. It became a deeply emotional experience for those assigned to investigate it. Though the cause of death was obvious, the motive and identity of the killer were not. Investigators had few immediate answers. The lack of resolution, paired with the shocking nature of the crime, cast a long shadow over the department. This uncertainty began to define the investigation, marking the early realization that this would not be a case with quick answers. It was the beginning of a long, difficult journey toward justice. In the months and years following Kathy Krausenek's murder, investigators were unable to make significant progress. Despite the brutality of the crime and the emotional toll it took on everyone involved, the case eventually began to stall. There were no immediate arrests, and no clear suspect emerged. The crime scene had offered little in the way of answers, and crucial questions remained. Who would want Kathy dead, and why? As time passed, the investigation lost momentum. Leads dried up. Evidence, if any existed, failed to yield results. The passage of years only deepened the mystery, and the case was eventually classified as a cold case. For Kathy's family, including her young daughter Sarah, this lack of resolution left an open wound. There was no closure, no justice, and no understanding of what had taken place that February morning in Brighton. The presence of 3-year-old Sarah in the home at the time of the murder continued to cast a long shadow over the case. What she might have witnessed or remembered became a matter of public interest and private concern. Yet, no official statement or insight into her recollections has been provided, and the script remains grounded in only what is confirmed. Speculation is left unspoken. In a preview of the Dateline episode, correspondent Andrea Canning captured the emotional weight that lingered. What had she seen? What did she know? Questions that would hang over this family, this entire town, longer than anyone could have imagined. The unresolved nature of the crime and the silence that followed turned the case into one of those long unsolved mysteries that never quite faded. It remained a haunting presence in Brighton, waiting for answers that would not come for decades. Nearly 40 years after the brutal murder of Kathy Krausenek, a new investigative team revisited the case. According to the synopsis from Dateline, modern investigators reopened the long cold file, seeking answers in a crime that had haunted the community of Brighton for decades. Though time had passed, interest in the case never fully disappeared. The disturbing nature of the crime, a woman murdered in her own bed with her young child nearby, continued to raise concerns, both publicly and within law enforcement. The fact that no resolution had been reached only intensified the need for a fresh look. With advancements in investigative practices and a renewed sense of determination, the new team set out to uncover the truth. While the background information does not provide specifics on the steps taken or the evidence uncovered, it does confirm that these efforts led to a major development. A suspect was ultimately convicted in Kathy Krausenek's murder. This marked a significant turning point in a case that had remained unsolved for nearly 4 decades. As part of its coverage, Dateline included interviews with key figures connected to the renewed investigation. Kathy's sister, Annette Schlosser, and Monroe County District Attorney Sandra Dorley were both featured in the episode, offering insight into the emotional and legal dimensions of the case's re-examination. Their appearances underscore the lasting impact of the crime and the importance of continuing efforts to seek justice, even decades later. For nearly 4 decades, the brutal murder of Kathleen Krausenek remained one of the most haunting unsolved cases in Brighton, New York. But justice, though delayed, eventually found its way. In 2019, a fresh look at the evidence led to a major breakthrough. Investigators re-examined the timeline of events and found that Jim Krausenek's account of the day Kathy died was filled with inconsistencies. Experts testified that the window he claimed the killer used to enter the home had been broken from the inside. Moreover, the timeline revealed it was almost impossible for someone to break in, murder Kathy with an axe, and escape undetected within the short time Jim claimed to have been away from the house. In 2022, more than 40 years after Kathy was killed, her husband, James Krausenek, was found guilty of second-degree murder. The trial included testimony from forensic experts, law enforcement officers, and even Kathy's family members. The prosecution argued successfully that Jim had murdered Kathy while their daughter was asleep in the next room, a shocking betrayal masked for decades behind a clean-cut facade. On November 7, 2022, Jim was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. The courtroom was filled with emotional testimony, from Kathy's surviving family to Sarah, their daughter, who was just 3 years old at the time of the murder. Some supported Jim, believing he was innocent. Others felt deep relief that the truth had finally come to light. However, the story did not end there. In 2023, Jim died in prison while his legal team was still pursuing an appeal to overturn the conviction. His death left unanswered questions, but for many, it marked the final chapter in a case that had haunted them for decades. Justice, though imperfect, had finally been served.
In the early hours of July 20th, in Butte Park, Cardiff, a brutal and unprovoked assault took place that would later horrify the nation. The victim was Dr. Gary Jenkins, a 54-year-old consultant psychiatrist and father of two. Known for his kindness and compassion, Dr. Jenkins had returned to his home city of Cardiff following a separation from his wife. During this period, he often visited Butte Park, a location frequented by men seeking same-sex encounters. On this particular night, Dr. Jenkins encountered three individuals who would become his killers: Lee Strickland, age 36, Jason Edwards, age 26, and Dion Timms Williams, a 16-year-old schoolgirl. The trio had entered the park with a shared and sinister purpose. According to prosecution, they were hunting for vulnerable gay men with the intent to rob them. Their actions were described in court as being driven by greed, homophobia, and a disturbing enjoyment of violence. What followed was a prolonged and vicious assault. For nearly 30 minutes, Dr. Jenkins was repeatedly punched, kicked, and stamped on. All three attackers participated in the beating, encouraging one another throughout. The violence was indiscriminate and relentless. Dr. Jenkins cried out, begging for them to stop. His desperate pleas for mercy were ignored. CCTV audio captured the harrowing sounds of the attack. Timms Williams was heard laughing during the beating, further underlining the cruelty of the event. At one point, she reportedly stated, "Yeah, I needed that," reflecting a chilling detachment from the violence she had taken part in. Despite the horrifying nature of the assault, none of the three attackers relented. Dr. Jenkins' cries turned into groans as the severity of his injuries escalated. By the time emergency services arrived at the scene, he was barely recognizable. He had suffered multiple severe brain injuries as a result of the sustained attack. Dr. Jenkins was transported to University Hospital Wales, where he remained in critical condition. Medical professionals fought to save his life, but the injuries proved too severe. 16 days after the attack, he succumbed to his wounds and was pronounced dead. The prolonged suffering he endured, captured in real-time audio, later became a key element in the court proceedings. This tragic and senseless attack would eventually lead to one of the most high-profile trials in Wales that year, exposing the level of brutality three individuals were capable of inflicting on a man whose life had been dedicated to helping others. Dr. Gary Jenkins was a highly respected consultant psychiatrist who spent his life helping others. Known for his deep compassion, empathy, and professionalism, he was remembered by those who knew him as one of the most humane and kind-hearted individuals they had ever encountered. His work in the field of mental health impacted countless lives, and his dedication to improving the well-being of his patients earned him widespread respect throughout his career. 6 years before his tragic death, Dr. Jenkins had separated from his wife and moved back to Cardiff, the city where he was raised. As he adjusted to this new chapter in his life, he maintained his commitment to the profession while also navigating personal changes. He was a bisexual man and was known to visit Butte Park, a place where some men sought consensual same-sex encounters. It was during one of these visits that he encountered the three individuals who would later take his life. Dr. Jenkins was also a devoted father to two daughters. During the trial, his wife delivered a heart-wrenching statement describing the unbearable pain of losing years Gary could have spent with their children. She expressed that the loss of many more years and the happy times that Gary could have had with his daughters has been very painful and distressing to bear. Her words captured the deep emotional void left behind by his sudden and violent death. During sentencing, Judge Daniel Williams reflected on the impact of Jenkins' murder. He stated that the world was all the more dimmer following his loss. It's less kind, it's less colorful, with less humor, music, and energy. The judge remarked, emphasizing the profound human cost of the tragedy. These words served as a powerful tribute to the life Dr. Jenkins had lived and the positive energy he had brought to those around him. Although the court proceedings could not undo the harm inflicted, Jenkins' family expressed relief that justice had been achieved. In their final remarks, they said, "We cannot bring Gary back, but as a family, We are relieved that justice is done, and through this process, we hope to rediscover our trust in humanity. Their strength in the face of law stood as a solemn testament to Dr. Jenkins' enduring legacy. The three individuals responsible for the brutal murder of Dr. Gary Jenkins were Lee Strickland, Jason Edwards, and Dion Timms Williams. Though they came from different backgrounds and circumstances, the court determined that all three shared equal responsibility for the violent attack that led to Dr. Jenkins' death. Lee Strickland, age 36 at the time of the murder, had a long criminal history with 58 previous convictions. Jason Edwards, age 26, had 35 prior convictions. Despite these lengthy records, neither man had previously been convicted of serious violence. Their defense teams argued during the trial that the attack on Dr. Jenkins was entirely out of character for both. However, this claim was sharply contrasted by the brutality displayed during the nearly 30-minute assault. Dion Timms Williams, just 16 years old at the time of the killing, was a schoolgirl with no known prior relationship to Strickland or Edwards before that night. The court was told she had previously been cautioned in 2019 for possession of a blade. More significantly, evidence presented suggested she had endured historical trauma, which may have made her vulnerable to influence or exploitation by older individuals. However, her behavior during the assault was chilling. CCTV audio recorded her laughing during the beating and later stating, "Yeah, I needed that," a comment that reflected a disturbing level of detachment and enjoyment. The prosecution described the trio's motive as driven by greed, homophobia, and a disturbing liking for violence. They had entered Butte Park that night, hunting for vulnerable gay men to rob. Once the attack began, all three participated fully. Each punched, kicked, and stamped on Dr. Jenkins while encouraging each other to continue. During sentencing, Judge Daniel Williams emphasized the sheer brutality of the act, stating that all three had taken an equal part in the killing. Their collective actions, recorded and played in court, left little doubt as to the cruelty they inflicted. The court rejected any attempt to minimize the role of any individual, concluding that their joint participation in the prolonged violence made each of them fully accountable for Dr. Jenkins' death. The motive behind the murder of Dr. Gary Jenkins was laid out in clear terms during the court proceedings. Prosecutor Dafford Enoch QC told the jury that the three attackers, Lee Strickland, Jason Edwards, and Dion Timms Williams, entered Butte Park on the night of July 20th with shared and sinister purpose: to target vulnerable gay men with the intention of robbing them. The attack on Dr. Jenkins was not random. He was deliberately selected as part of a plan fueled by greed, homophobia, and a disturbing appetite for violence. The prosecution emphasized that this was a calculated assault. The trio did not merely stumble upon Dr. Jenkins. Instead, they were actively seeking out victims within the park, a location known as a meeting place for men seeking same-sex encounters. Dr. Jenkins, who frequently visited the park, became their target that night. Once the attack began, it became clear that their motives extended beyond theft. The brutality of the violence, which lasted nearly 30 minutes, demonstrated a level of cruelty that shocked both investigators and the public. Despite Dr. Jenkins' repeated pleas for mercy, which were captured in the park's CCTV audio, none of the attackers stopped. Instead, they continued the assault while encouraging each other. Timms Williams could be heard laughing, adding to the horror of the recording. Judge Daniel Williams later remarked on the callousness of their actions. He stated that they ignored Jenkins' desperate pleas to stop, even after his pleas turned to groans as his life ebbed away. His comments reflected the court's conclusion that the attackers acted with complete disregard for human life. The judge also dismissed any suggestions that the attack was spontaneous or without intention. The trio's coordinated behavior, their selection of victim, and their lack of remorse were all seen as evidence of shared and deliberate cruelty. This section of the trial made it clear that the murder of Dr. Jenkins was driven not by impulse, but by a combination of prejudice, greed, and a disturbing willingness to inflict harm without hesitation or regret. The trial of Lee Strickland, Jason Edwards, and Dion Timms Williams took place at Merthyr Crown Court over an 8-day period between January and February of the year following Dr. Gary Jenkins' murder. Each of the three defendants had admitted to manslaughter and robbery. However, they denied the more serious charge of murder. The jury, after hearing detailed and harrowing evidence, found all three guilty of murder. Central to the prosecution's case was the CCTV audio footage that captured nearly the entire 28-minute assault. The recording included Dr. Jenkins' desperate cries for mercy and the cruel laughter of his attackers. Jurors also heard how the trio egged each other on, delivering punches, kicks, and stamps while ignoring the pleas of their dying victim. The disturbing nature of the audio played a pivotal role in establishing the intent and shared responsibility among the three defendants. Following their convictions, Judge Daniel Williams sentenced Lee Strickland and Jason Edwards to life imprisonment, ordering each to serve a minimum term of 32 years before becoming eligible for parole. Deon Timms Williams, who was only 16 at the time of the crime, was sentenced to a minimum of 17 years. Despite her age, the court emphasized the active and willing role she played in the attack. During sentencing, Judge Williams offered pointed criticism of all three defendants. He stated, "Each of you punched, kicked, and stamped on him and encouraged each other to do so. For as long as 28 minutes, it may be that the three of you beat Gary Jenkins." He called attention to the utter absence of remorse, further noting, "You ignored his desperate pleas to stop even after his pleas turned to groans as his life ebbed away." The judge described the assault as chilling and without mercy, underscoring the savage cruelty of the act. In response to the verdict and sentencing, Dr. Jenkins' wife issued a solemn statement. She acknowledged that there were no winners in the case, only the enduring pain of loss. She said, "We cannot bring Gary back. There are no winners in this case, only losers. But as a family, we are relieved that justice is done. And through this process, we hope to rediscover our trust in humanity." Her words reflected a small measure of closure in an otherwise devastating and senseless tragedy. In the wake of Dr. Gary Jenkins' brutal murder, the impact rippled far beyond the courtroom. Cardiff, the city where he lived and worked, was left in mourning. So too were his family, the medical community, and members of the LGBTQ+ community, all of whom struggled to process the horror and senselessness of the crime. Dr. Jenkins had built a life around compassion, healing, and understanding. He was known as a kind and humane psychiatrist who had devoted himself to helping others. His violent death in a public park shocked those who knew him personally and those who only knew of him through his work. During sentencing, Judge Daniel Williams captured the depth of this loss. "The world is less kind," he said. "It is less colorful, with less humor, music, and energy." His words did not dramatize the tragedy, but instead offered a stark, truthful reflection of the void left behind. He spoke not only to the cruelty of the act, but to the brightness and decency of the man whose life had been taken. Dr. Jenkins' wife also expressed the family's ongoing grief. "The loss of many more years and the happy times that Gary could have had with his daughters has been very painful and distressing to bear," she said. Her statement concluded with a quiet hope. "We cannot bring Gary back, but as a family, we are relieved that justice is done. And through this process, we hope to rediscover our trust in humanity." There were no grand conclusions, no attempt to draw meaning from the senseless. The aftermath of the crime was marked by sorrow and disbelief. What remained was a memory of a man, remembered not for the violence he endured, but for the kindness and compassion he embodied. As Cardiff mourned one of its own, the community carried forward his legacy in silence, reflection, and quiet resilience.